This video is part of a series intended to help citizens, members of the media, public officials, or anyone acting on their behalf to better understand Florida's exceedingly broad Public Records Act. These videos may be used by anyone and may be freely distributed without charge. I am not an attorney. I am not qualified, nor am I authorized to give legal advice to the public, so I don't. Any information provided by me in person, on video, or through fogwatch.org is readily available from the Florida First Amendment Foundation and the Florida Attorney General's Office of Open Government, as well as many other sources online. Section 119.011, Parent 2 of the Florida Statutes defines agency to include any state, county, district, authority, or municipal officer, department, division, board, bureau, commission, or other separate unit of government, created or established by law, including, for the purposes of this chapter, the Commission on Ethics, the Public Service Commission, and the Office of Public Counsel, and any other public or private agency, person, partnership, corporation, or business entity acting on behalf of any public agency. In addition, Article 1, Section 24 of the Florida Constitution established a constitutional right of access to any public record made or received in connection with the official business of any public body, officer, or employee of the state, or persons acting on their behalf, except with respect to those records exempted pursuant to this section or specifically made confidential by this Constitution. This constitutional right of access includes the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government, counties, municipalities, and districts, and each constitutional officer, board, and commission, or entity created pursuant to law or by the Constitution. There are many public agencies in Florida. Here are just a few examples: advisory boards, commissions, committees, school boards. Statewide, there are 67 counties, each with a school board. Municipalities. There are more than 412 villages, towns, and cities in Florida. Counties. Florida has 67 counties. Supervisors of election, property appraisers, tax collectors, sheriffs. There is no such thing as a sheriff's department in Florida. In Polk County, for example, there is no such entity as the PCSO, or the Polk County Sheriff's Office. There is Grady Judd, Sheriff of Polk County. Police departments, including sheriffs, there are about 360 law enforcement agencies statewide. Mosquito control boards. Community development districts. There are about 1,600 CDD statewide. They're essentially like many municipalities. As an example, a CDD may be created as a result of a private land developer building a new residential development. In order to generate revenue for the ongoing maintenance of roads and other infrastructure, the developer may seek a charter as a CDD. Once created, the CDD has taxing authority and becomes a public agency. There are, of course, state agencies. I would estimate there are at least 100 state agencies. For instance, the Florida Department of Corrections, the Florida Department of Education, the Florida Department of Health, and many more. There are fire districts. Also, some state and local contractors, private companies that are operating on behalf of a state or local agency, may be subject to the Public Records Act. This is an area that is far more complex than simply considering publicly operated agencies. I would estimate, however, that there are more than 4,000 private companies under contract with the state of Florida whose contracts explicitly make them subject to the Public Records Act. The Florida Supreme Court has established two methods of determining whether or not a private entity is subject to the Public Records Act. One is the totality of factors test, also known as the Schwab-Twitty test. Second is the delegation test. The totality of factors test asks the court to consider 9 factors in determining if a private entity is an agency, as the Public Records Act uses that term. The factors are: 1. The level of public funding. 2. commingling of funds. 3. Whether the activity was conducted on publicly owned property. 4. Whether the contracted services are an integral part of the public agency's chosen decision-making process. 5. Whether the private entity is performing a governmental function or a function which the public agency otherwise would perform. 6. The extent of the public agency's involvement with, regulation of, or control over the private entity. 7. Whether the private entity was created by the public agency. 8. Whether the public agency has a substantial financial interest in the private entity. 9. For whose benefit the private entity is functioning. The application of the totality of factors test and the attendant legal analysis is complex and should involve the use of experienced legal counsel. The second test, established by the Florida Supreme Court in determining if a private agency is subject to the Public Records Act, is the delegation test. This is much simpler than the totality of factors test. Essentially, it asks the question, is the entity standing in the shoes of the state? Has the state delegated its duties to a private entity? Although this is generally a much simpler analysis, experienced legal counsel should be consulted when considering these questions. One final tip. When considering state contractors, take a look at their contract documents. These are generally available free online by visiting the Florida State CFO's website. This is one of the best open government resources available to citizens and the media.